David, there's a very famous book, I can't remember what year it was, late 60s maybe, by Philip Reef, who was Susan Sontag's husband.
The Triumph of the Therapeutic.
The Triumph of the idea is that we're actually...
1966.
We're living in a therapeutic paradigm now where health and self-actualisation and so on, that's actually the driving force that's we're left with. And brilliant book. I'd love to know what you think about it. But
well, it is a brilliant book, but it's actually quite a cynical book because Philip Reef was writing from a position of disbelief, and he was both commenting on the triumph of the therapeutic but also highly critical of it. I thought it was a fascinating book. It's a book that warrants rereading. It's a great classic. I love it, but I also don't like it because his basic position is that we are now so concerned with ourselves that nothing much else matters, just the therapy of the self. But as Eugene's just said, the denial of self is really a central pillar of every spiritual pathway. So here we have this paradox that...
I think he was saying that's breaking down, of course.
We have this kind of paradox, which is that religion's saying you must deny yourself, and Jesus says deny yourself and pick up your cross and follow me, and yet on the other hand spirituality is saying, particularly in terms of Kevin's work with the creation story, there's not just original sin, there's also original blessing. So as well as operating from a vision of original sin, we also have to operate from a sense that there is a God element in us, which is what Peter was getting at before.
I was trying.
No, you were getting there, and you were saying that all of us are saved, as it were, in inverted commas, to the extent that we are saved when we feel that we are connected to this divine spark. But Stephen, let me give you a little very short profile of where I'm coming from in spirituality and health. I was very moved by your biographical discussion, and all these things do have biographical points of origination. They're not just ideas. About 15 years ago, sensing in the student community a longing for spirituality and a desire to explore it, I somewhat foolishly, perhaps courageously, or both, set up a course at my university just called Spirituality. Now, I didn't even know what the students meant by spirituality because I'm an old-fashioned person who still goes to church. And of course, for them, spirituality means something very different. So I set this up, ran it for about 10 years, and in the last few years, I noticed something, which is that of the hundreds and hundreds of students who enrolled in spirituality course, most of them had suffered. They'd either had experience before their time, which was one of Peter's comments. They were wise before their time. In fact, talk about Jung, it threw Jung's theory out the window. Jung's view is that we only start reaching for God in the second half of life. I was dealing with 17 and 18-year-olds who were grappling with these so-called second half of life questions as teenagers. So, in other words, that part of Jung's theory is completely dated. I think the second half of
Can
life...
I just interrupt you there, Art? do you think that's that's the case in general, or were you dealing? Is it your view that younger people tend to be grappling in that way only when they have?
Look, I think Jung's theory is still valid for those people who live normal lives. But how many people live normal lives? Right. How many people have 35 to 40 years of uninterrupted ego development and then
without pain or suffering?
Without pain or suffering. This doesn't happen anymore.
Jung wasn't writing in the age of narcissism either.
No. But so these poor kids, they get hammered. Their parents are broken up, the families dispersed. They move from Melbourne to Sydney or Perth, somewhere else. They get discombobulated and they start feeling at odds with themselves, and then they realise they have to find a deeper dimension to live from. So, and this is what I found marvellous about Kevin's book. You said in your book, Kevin, that religion, for too long we've been wearing religion as a persona identity, and now it has to be linked to the inner self, not just the mask. That's the kind of convulsion that's happening in religion at the moment. So here I was with hundreds of students, and then I started surveying them quite anonymously. I found that some of them had teenage depression. Some of them had suicidal thoughts and ideation. Some of them had and still had anxiety and anxiety attacks, panic attacks, chronic fatigue syndrome, all kinds of things which are not purely and simply to do with, a bacterial or viral cause. And that in the last few years of teaching this course, the number of students who had unfortunate mental health experiences was as high as 78% of them. 78% of my cohort had problems with mental health. So coming back to your question, Stephen, I think that for those people who have had disrupted lives, spirituality becomes an urgent personal issue much more quickly. For those people who still have that idyllic Jungian life where they first 35, 40 years uninterrupted, then the so-called midlife crisis kicks in. But what and the media makes a joke of the midlife crisis these days, but it's very real for a lot of people. But what I saw was the quarter life crisis. That is to say, people at 15, 16, 17 who had gone through a crisis, and the depth from these people, and that's why, I've just met Peter today, and it's lovely to meet you, Peter. But
thank you.
What you're saying about your patients is what exactly I can say about my students. That is that, I'm supposed to be their teacher, but I learned from them. I learned their suffering. I learned how they've coped with suffering. I learned why spirituality is so vitally important for them. And the most heartbreaking thing of all, I learned that the churches aren't interested in their spirituality because it's not stamped religion. You see? It's not, or to quote our New South Wales poet Les Murray, what we have received is the ordinary mail of the other world, wholly common, not postmarked divine.
Can I just pick you up there? I will come to you, Kevin, but just on that exact point.
Yes.
In your experience in St Vincent's, the nuns are obviously a big presence, or were in
the nuns were marvellous.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. But my question to you is, was official religion able to provide anything that these people needed?
Apart from the nuns, I'll give you a very quick anecdote. There was one dreadful day at St Vincent's that happened in San Francisco as well, where there were Ward 17 South. There were many men lying in beds, attached to drips. Their meals were left outside the room. No one would take their meals into them. I took their meals into them. I was probably the only psychologist in Sydney working in the HIV/AIDS era in those days. Where were the clergy? The only clergy who would visit these people who were dying and needing the Vatican to the last rites, confession, the communion, were the Vincentians, and I think they've largely gone out of existence now, but by and large the clergy stayed away. The nuns, beautiful in their presence and connection with the divine within themselves, were there at the bedsides with me. That's why I want to make a case, have wanted to make a case, at least by mention today, of the importance of the feminine within ourselves, within us men, the anima side of ourselves, and in society generally, to give women a role.
The actor Rupert Everett wrote the most beautiful piece the other day in the Evening Standard, the Weekly Standard, whatever, English newspaper, about the gay revolution. And he'd been asked to Russell Brand, the comedian, was editing that section and asked him to write a piece. And the very end of the piece was the most beautiful tribute to women. And it was something along the lines of, they danced with us under the mirror ball while their husbands or boyfriends fumed, and they held our hands in the darkest night. And he talked about the way that the feminist revolution and the gay revolution had been absolutely tied together. But it was about this amazing sharing of joy and suffering.
Yes.
That only that gay men had a special connection with women along that line. I think it's the most wonderful tribute.